Decentralized identities. How many of you have heard that word? OK, good. Half, maybe a little more. So let's dive into that in a bit. So a little bit about me. This is a Jot presentation on me. How many speak Jot? If you don't, it says that I'm Jacob Ideskog. I work at Curity. I work a lot with identity stuff, OAuth and OpenID Connect, and other related things, anything geeky around identity. It's kind of fun, I think. I live here in Sweden. I'm 42 years old. I work at Curity, like I said. But identity in itself is a pretty interesting problem. And in order to understand the sort of shift that is about to happen, I want to look back a little bit and think of identity systems as a whole. Like, what are they? So this is going to be some basics around identity, and they're good to keep in mind. So in any identity system, we always have a subject. The subject is typically the person that it's about. The subject usually wants some sort of access to another system, which we call a relying party. That could be a bank in the physical world, or it could be a bank in the online world. It could be anything, essentially. But let's think about the physical world a little bit. So I want to go into the bank, and I want to do something there. In order to do so, I need to present a credential to them. In the real world, that is some sort of ID card. It could be the passport. It could be a driver's license, depending on country, what's accepted as an ID card. But the point of that is that I present the credential that is issued to me by someone. So when I got my passport, I had to go to the passport authority, which is the police in Sweden, and I had to prove myself. So it's not only OK to go there and say, I need a passport, I need to present another passport probably to get it, or if it's the first time I get it, I probably need my parents with me or someone else who can sort of assert my identity at that time. So there's a whole procedure going on in order to issue this credential the first time, right? And the relying party, or the bank in this case, they know that. So when I present the passport, they'll take that and they'll check, like, is this a real passport? Because they know what it looks like when it's issued from the Swedish authorities, for instance. If it's a real passport, then they know, OK, there has been a procedure on how to issue this particular passport. And that procedure is followed because we trust the police or whoever issued it. And the more institutions you trust, the more credentials you can accept. But that's not enough. It's not enough to give them my passport and they'll say, OK, fine. I mean, they need to verify it too. So they're going to check the passport, they're going to open it up, going to look at my face, and they're going to compare it to the picture. Because that's usually how we do it with physical credentials. And if it doesn't have a picture, you usually need to combine credentials. So your library card maybe with an ID card if you want to do special things. This verification can, of course, be automated. Like if you've been traveling recently, I mean, you can scan your passport at the airports these days. There's a camera, and the passport contains biometric information. The camera checks the same biometric information, and it's, you're physically there. You're physically verifying the document. So it's the same thing. It doesn't have to be a person on the other side doing it, but there's a verification procedure going on. And if all of these are true, you get access. So I can open a bank account, or I can withdraw money if I have any, and so on. That means that the identity systems, in general, they consist of all these sort of bits. There's the subject, the person. There's the relying party who trusts the issuer. And the issuer issues a credential, then later is verified. And if all of these sort of match in this Venn diagram, you get access. So today, on the internet, we have a solution for this. So how do we transfer the physical sort of idea of identity systems to something I can do online? And that's called federation. Federation is the way to log in using various systems online. I'm going to talk about it as a concept. So this is not SAML, this is not OpenID, this is just how does federation work in general? Because it's what we're doing all the time. So I go to bank.com now instead, and I'm going to log in there. And I say, I need access. And they're going to say, oh, that's fine. Just go over to this identity provider, this IDP, and log in over there. So that could be a redirect in the browser, or if you're using some sort of mobile EID, it could be open this app and do it. But for all intents and purposes, that's a redirect. Just works a little differently in different scenarios. And at the IDP, they're going to say, enter your PIN, show your face-to-face ID, jump through hoops, do whatever it takes to get logged in. And then the issuer, the IDP, they will issue a result. And that's typically a token. It could be other things. It could just be a response over TLS and things like that. And this token is signed by the identity provider, and it says, OK, here's Jacob. He just logged in. That's how federation works. So let's compare these two. In the physical world, when using physical identity mechanisms, I get the credential issued once. But if I do it in the federated world online, it's issued essentially every time I log in, right? The relying party in the physical world trusts that the issuer, but it also can verify the credential on its own. It doesn't have to call the passport authority and check, like, I have this document here, is this from you? It doesn't have to do that. Whereas in the federated world, you have to do that. You have to call every time to the IDP and check. Please log this user in now for me. The credential in the physical world is owned by the user, and that's a pretty big thing. So I have my passport, it's in my pocket, I own it. But I don't own the account at the IDP. It's not really mine. It's whatever company is being the IDP. And very importantly, in the real world, I know what data I'm sharing. I have my passport, I show it to you, I know what's on there, and that's all you can see. I can try to redact things, but they're probably not going to allow me to do that, but at least I know. But when using an IDP, I have no idea. As a user, I have no idea. It's happening on the back end, right? So all this information in there, I could guess it's probably going to be my personal number because I'm Swedish and it's an EID I'm using, or it's going to be my name. But for all I know, it could be my shoe size or other things, right? And OAuth has mechanisms to improve this, to put the user back in control, but it's not used that much. So if we compare these two from another perspective of the footprints, if I'm traveling around using my identification as a passport, going into various places where I need to prove things, I show it, and these dots pop up. But they only pop up there. They don't connect. If I do the same thing online, well, obviously, all these sites connect back to the IDP, and the IDP knows, OK, Jacob just logged into, shoe store. Now he logged into blah and blah. So there's a ledger essentially available on the IDP. You all use Google logins, Facebook logins, EIDs perhaps. It's the same thing. I mean, they have that information, and that's an interesting thing from a privacy perspective. It's metadata. So they don't know necessarily what you're doing there, but that you did it. This produces a dilemma that you don't really know or control what data is being shared. The issuer knows when and where you have shared the data that you don't know that you have shared. But you need to do this. You need to really overshare information in order to get access. That's the only way you can prove your identity online. So that brings us to decentralized identity. So this is a shift, a really big shift going on that is going to change how we use identity online in the coming, well, hopefully long term. So let's dive in and see what actors do we have in this world. Well, we have the relying party, we have the subject, and we have the issuer. But we call them different things. We call the relying party a holder. We call the relying party, we call the verifier. We call the subject a holder. The issuer is still the issuer. The holder is commonly known as a wallet because it's implemented as such. And the wallet, you probably all use those. There's the Apple Wallet already today. There's the Google Wallet. There's other wallets. What's happening now is that there are standards emerging for how can we build wallets and share this data back and forth universally. So OpenID Foundation, they're working hard on something called OpenID for verifiable credentials. There are other standards too, but I think the OpenID one is the one that will prevail. So let's look at this a little bit. So the flow is slightly different. I'll show this from 2 angles. So first, one important aspect about a wallet is that it holds a private key. So now we're not really authenticating the user. It's the wallet that matters. And the wallet is in your phone. Maybe it's backed up somewhere, but it works pretty much like a regular wallet. If you lose your phone and it wasn't backed up, sucks to be you. You have to get a new one and get all the credentials again and report it stolen and these type of things. So, yeah, there could be drawbacks. But there are solutions for that. Because that wallet holds a secret that never leaves that wallet if you don't back it up. And when you want to credential issues, you prove and you say, hey, I have this secret here. Please bind your credential now, Mr. Issuer, to my secret. So only I can use it. And the issuer will then generate some sort of credential. It could be your EID, say. And it will sign it with the issuer's key, but then it will also bind it, saying this one can actually only be used by the one who possesses the key. And that means later on, when I turn around and I'm about to present this to someone else, I have to actually encapsulate this in credential with a signature from my private key so that so the verifier can be sure that, okay, yeah, this came from the wallet, it was issued to. So this is essentially a face match when you compare it to a passport in the real world. It was issued to me, it's my face on there. It was issued to my wallet, it's my key that actually is used to present it. In practice, it works something like this. You go to a website and you log in, and say that I go to the Passport Authority in Sweden and I log in using some EID system. And inside there, they say, okay, do you want your passport now as a credential to your wallet? Yes. So here's a QR code. I tick my wallet, I scan the QR code, the credential gets issued to my wallet. It's not that difficult. Same thing when I go somewhere else then, and I'm about to log in to my bank, and they say, okay, you need to prove you are you, so you need to use your X credential. Here's a QR code that has the requirement of what we're looking for. I scan that. The wallet will pop up and say, they're asking for a passport or a driver's license. You have both? Which one do you want to share? I'll take the passport. Okay, here you go. Sent back to the verifier. And now they can check, is this credential issued by someone we trust? So I mean, this trust, it's always there in any identity system we do. But now it's a digital signature that we're checking. And very importantly, it's now a dotted line. So the verifier doesn't have to call the issuer to check, did you issue this credential? No, it can just check the signature of the credential, and it sees, okay, this is issued by Passport Authority. I trust them because I know they're rigorous when they issue these. But I only trust perhaps the Swedish one because I don't know how to understand German ones. That's not a given. So, I mean, you choose what you trust. So let's compare these two then. So we have federated identity, where we issued the credentials on every login. Now we're issuing them the once. Back to how the physical world works. Do we have to call the relying party every time, the issuer every time? No, we can verify the credentials on our own. We don't have to call the issuer every time. Who owns the credential? The credential in the decentralized world is now owned by the user holding that wallet. That's a pretty big difference. And the user doesn't know what I'm sharing. Well, that's how we used to be. Now I know exactly what I'm sharing because it's in my wallet. And if the wallet doesn't show that to you, well, pick another wallet. Take one where you can see and where you can know what you're sharing with who. So I've been saying credentials a lot, and it's actually called verifiable credential. As you all now understand, it's because we can verify them. So we can issue these credentials, and someone else can verify them, and it's a pretty neat technology. But what are they? Essentially, they're self-contained documents, often JSON, probably almost always JSON, They contain claims about the user. So claims are attributes asserted by someone. So the tax authority says, Jacob is married. That could be a claim in there. They are signed by the issuer, and they are bound to the wallet. And they can only be presented by the wallet they were issued to. So it gives us a lot of these properties that we have in the physical world, which is super, super interesting. What can they be? Well, that's the thing. They can be anything. There's nothing in any of these protocols saying what a credential can be. They can be your driver's license. They can be something issued by my employer saying I work there. That gives me access to certain things. They can be movie tickets. They can be a coupon from a store where it says every time you present this, you get 5% discount for the next month until it expires. It could be your degree from the university. It could be gaming scores, library cards. Could even be your green card for golf. Saying you have this handicap, so when I go somewhere else, it's I can present that and prove that, and they say it's true. So I don't play golf, so I don't know, but maybe that's the thing. But the claims inside these credentials, depending on what the credential is trying to tell us, they will be different. But if you trust the one who issued it, you can know they're true. So for a driver's license, for instance, it could be the name. Maybe there's some document ID that corresponds to the actual physical one. I don't know. Maybe there's a license type in there saying you can drive a truck, but you can drive a car, but not a motorcycle. Maybe there are conditions. You have to wear glasses. Probably a birth date. Maybe a personal number in some countries. So depends. Which also means a driver's license from one country may not look the same as from another. That's not a given just because we have this system. That's sort of the next level thing on top of this. Like, how do we decide? We could have other ones that we just make up that don't match anything in the physical world. We could have a home credential that someone issues that says, here's Jacob's verified email, here's his verified phone number, and the name and maybe your home address. Could be a useful credential. So then the question is this just a new way to overshare? Or spill our beans. I'd like to think this is a new way of sharing. Because if we take this home credential, and I go somewhere and they say, hey, can you give us your email so that we can sign you up here? Well, you asked for the email. So how do I give you the email now? I see that if I send you this, I'm going to give you all 4. So the people who started to think about this problem, I think it's over 15 years ago now, and I've worked. One of the sort of design goals of decentralized identity as a concept and as protocols being emerged is we need to make sure we keep privacy now. We need to do it right this time. So there's a technique now called selective disclosure, which means that I can take a credential, but I can redact things that you shouldn't see. So if you ask for the email, you should only get the email. And it's a pretty cool technique, actually, how they do that. There are various formats for it, some more advanced than others. But in essence, it's still valid, even though you don't get the whole picture when you get it. That's pretty cool. So I can, both as a website or an app or something that needs your email, I can say, yeah, I can accept the home credential, but please only send me the email, because otherwise I have to deal with GDPR and all these other things because you're sending me too much data. So please don't. And as a user, I can also do that. Say, I don't want to send you this other data because it's optional, and you let me not send it. So click them away. So with this, we can start rethinking things. Let's rethink logging a little bit. And what is login? There are a couple things. There are more things than this, obviously. But if we split the activities in 2, at least, there's the onboarding activity, and then there's the actual login activity. And in onboarding, we do things like email verification. See where I'm going with this? User detail collection. But then we also do typically authenticator binding. Like, how do you want to log in on this site that you're now signing up for? And then when you log in, we prove that binding. We use whatever method we decided to, password or preferably passkey or something like that. But we need to keep in mind, there are also a lot of cases where we don't really need to create an account for a user. And that's especially true in EID cases, but it's going to become very true even for credential cases, because you can now present valid proof of who you are without really disclosing who you are. And that could be enough in a lot of cases. So we have this sort of semi-anonymous or fully anonymous, still authenticated case that we need to deal with. But the point is usually with authentication that we need to prove that we're the same user that we were last time. And let's look at onboarding. So I go to a site, they say, please register. I present my credentials according to the mechanisms we discussed, and we're done. OK. But like I said, we shouldn't use credentials all the time, because it's a bit clunky, like QR codes, or even when it's NFC and stuff. It could be clunky. So we need to do that authenticator binding. So on enrollment, if we're about to create an account, we usually slip in this extra step of like gathering details about the user, then adding an authentication mechanism like a passkey. And if you don't know what passkeys are, grab me later. They're awesome. And then when we log in, after we did the sign up, then I don't necessarily need to present the credential. If I created an account, I could just present my passkey. OK, what does this mean for this room? Because we're talking about APIs a lot. What do you need to think about with this huge shift coming for the identity side of the equation on the API side? Well, for starters, if you're not on a token-based architecture today, you need to be planning for it. And by token-based architecture, I mean OAuth. That's essentially the only one. That essentially introduces an authorization server or an identity server in the middle. So you present credentials somewhere, and it presents tokens internally, access tokens. Because the thing is, by separating concerns, you gain a lot. So if we take a very simplified use case with OAuth, is I go to website. I say I want to log in. The website redirects me to my IDP. This is not the federation we talked about before. So this identity server is the organizations. It says, OK, cool, give me your credential. The credential is presented. There's a token issued to the site. And the site can then start using that to call the APIs. This goes for mobile or any type of mechanism, really. So it really didn't change anything in OAuth. If you know OAuth, this is what it does all the time. It just, now we call the wallet instead of having you enter username password. So it really didn't change much. But there are things to think about in this scenario. Because we talked about onboarding before, and I said there's going to be, most likely, in a lot of systems, more anonymous type access, or access where perhaps you don't really have the account you're used to. So what do we do in the done check mark? So I made a little list of, or let's call it a sanity check. Because there are a few things that will help. If you're not using a unique identifier for your user internally today that isn't the username, you should be starting now. Because it should be independent on the way the user logs in. Sounds pretty obvious. It should definitely be independent of subdivision or sub-organization. If you have multiple brands, make sure they're not bound to the brand. It's unique across all. It should be independent on the systems you're trying to access, definitely. So if I'm going to access you, I don't need to transform my username to something else. And it should be independent on if an account exists or not. And this could be a bit trickier. And always normalize claims. So the access token contains more than just the username. It contains things about the user that the API needs. So if you're going to put something in there, remember, always call it the same thing if it's the same thing you're trying to describe. An email is an email is an email, all the time. And this is really important now, because we're used to being able to share everything we want inside our system, right? But now we need to start thinking, even inside our boundaries, we need to not overshare information. I'll get back to that in a bit. But that means, the thing that needs to change here on the enrollment is we need to make sure we have this transformation piece to get our UID in the end. But we also need to check our token sanity. So let's say this is what we're sending to our APIs right now. First of all, does the API need the actual username as it is, and definitely does it need the email? That's PII. Well, probably not. So switch that. But then comes the other one. Okay, let's assume we have a service that is for everybody above, 18. Do I really need to send a birth date, or should I just send the age? Which is better, right? Better to send the age. But still a bit much. If all I care about is if you're an adult, that's all I need to send. Because we need to keep in mind now that the way the user logs in, if your credentials, or if your verifier asks for, can you prove that you're an adult? The obvious answer to that is true or false. So you're probably not going to get age. You're probably not going to get birth date. You're going to get, is over 18 true? That's the credential you got when the user logged in. So if your API then expects birth date later on, or information it really doesn't need, because it anyway just checks a Boolean in the end, like make sure you're sort of setting yourself up for that already now. And life becomes a lot easier if you try not to mix the two now, because the credentials on the outside are not the problem for the API on the inside. So on the inside, you trust the internal OAuth server. But on the outside, you trust other issuers, other credentials. And this is up to you. I mean, are you going to trust which countries, authorities, which systems, which universities, which coupons? Doesn't really matter, right? It depends on the scenario. So there's going to be a lot more use cases for what the user can present to do something in your application than there used to be. Because now there can be proofs, and they can be different strengths, but you may not need to care necessarily. So make sure you get this single point of trust where you keep that logic separate from everything else in your network. That will simplify life a lot. And if you haven't started looking at this yet, it's time to start reading a little bit and following a few blogs here and there and checking it out, because this is coming and it's really going to change how we do identity. So to sum up, identity is about trust. And internet identity today is pretty broken because it's too tightly coupled. Because that means the user doesn't have control, and decentralized identity is aiming to move that control back to the user. So this is, we think of this as an actual solution. The wallet is the new place where you store your identities. And the API needs to be ready. You need to start with the token-based architecture if you don't have it. You need to start thinking about your claims and make sure already now, scrap off data you don't need, because you might not get it in the future. Thank you.